Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I got an interview for you guys. I'm talking to Jacques Franko. He does music licensing and just makes a lot of his own beats and stuff like that. And I wanted to kind of get him on here and chat with him a little bit because he is doing something that I think is a very, very untapped market, untapped resource for a lot of us visually impaired people, especially if you're working at home, you're working in your home studio, working by yourself. This is definitely a source of income that I don't think a lot of us are aware of or even realize we can participate in. And this guy's doing it like every day. This is your main source of income right now, if I'm not mistaken, right, Jock?
Yes, sir, it is.
So I just wanted to have a chat with him and kind of bring this to everyone, like let everyone know this is an option for us out there. So, Jock, welcome, man. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, man. I appreciate the invite. Ever since I've first, let me say it's great to get in contact with people who are visually impaired and are really putting in efforts, such as yourself, to know Logic, to know the DAW. I mean, so it's yeah, I've learned a lot from you ever since I came in touch with you. So
Right on, right
definitely
on.
glad to have the opportunity to give back or share some things that
Yeah,
I've accumulated over the years. And yeah, so music
appreciate it. Thank
production.
you.
Yeah, no, it's definitely true. So, for
Checks in
me,
the mail, man.
music production for me. So, I'm 30. I'm 34. So I
Right.
actually started. Grew up playing music my whole life. Grew up playing drums. Started playing the keys when I was a teenager, and that's pretty much where.
But you
Um,
started out as a musician playing real instruments.
yeah, yes, I
Right.
have. Yeah, so my background is, and still my heart and soul is live music. So
Right, right.
playing live, playing keys, playing drums. Did a lot of playing in church over the years. Like,
Do you have a main instrument or is it drums and keys?
well, my main instrument, it's either or.
Right.
It's either
Okay.
or.
Okay.
I've more keys these days just because I really
Well, that
like.
makes sense in a DAW.
Right. I spend most of my time, and I do teach piano as well, and kind of jazz is my main thing with like piano and stuff. So that's my music for fun. If you
Hmm.
see me for fun, I'm playing jazz or listening to jazz. But for music production, I don't do a lot of jazz because it doesn't sell. But
Well,
anyway,
but
so
I feel like that's still something that can come in handy because you can do you can hold those jazz chords behind a beat sometimes for some nice textures and tones. So I feel
uh,
like that education still comes in handy.
oh, absolutely, the music theory absolutely comes in handy, and
Hmm.
and fortunately, like lo-fi is really like started to emerge, which basically is jazz and hip hop fused
Fused
in a
together.
like, yeah. So it's starting to manifest itself. The knowledge of jazz and music theory, and in that sense, is really starting to be more beneficial. So, um, yeah. So live music has kind of been my heart and passion, still is.
Right.
But I started getting into music production back in like I guess it was about 2006,
Right
and
on.
it was on a PC, and it was
Hmm.
back then I was using Zoom text.
You and me
I
both.
still, yeah, I still had some more vision back then,
Yep.
and
Yep.
it was a pain, man, trying to navigate. Then it was Fruity Loops, and
Uh,
it was horrible.
oh, the pain.
It was horrible. It was
And you
horrible.
probably had like a 14-inch monitor and you had it zoomed
Oh,
in so you could only see
definitely.
like one cell at a
Yeah, one
time.
one block at a time. It took me like 3 days to make a 4 bar loop.
Right.
But
That's why I could not get into Fruity Loops, to be honest with you. It was just so painful to use with Zoom text zoomed in like that.
oh, it was horrible. It,
Yeah.
it was absolutely horrible. So I didn't, really seek out to do music at that time. I mean,
Hmm.
that was my introduction to it.
Right. So you skipped the Sonar Reaper train on Windows, basically.
I did. I definitely did. And I think I got an iPad in like 2011 or so.
Hmm.
And it comes with GarageBand, and it comes with VoiceOver. So that was like my introduction to VoiceOver. And
Right.
then one
Right.
day I was just opened up GarageBand. I was like, let me see if
Let me see what I
VoiceOver
can do in here.
works. And yeah, and it worked. I was like, wow, it's pretty somewhat functional. I was able to record and do basic compositions and things of that nature. So that was my introduction to
Hmm.
Apple products and VoiceOver. And
And how did you find using that compared to your experience with Zoom text and Fruity Loops? Did you kind of take to it in the sense that you feel like you could get more done now, in a
well,
sense?
yeah, I could. And there's a lot more variables to that as well, because like
Hmm.
I could get more done because I got the iPad, and then once I realized it worked with voiceover,
Voiceover.
I got a little MIDI interface and just plugged
Right,
my
right.
keyboard up to it. And then I wasn't using, cells anymore. It was like,
Hmm.
okay, I'm doing everything on the keyboard. So that was a big difference.
Right,
Just being
right. So
able
you
to
weren't trying
play
to play like
stuff.
the on-screen touchscreen piano and stuff
No,
like
there was
that.
none of that. There was
Right,
definitely
right,
none of that. So
right.
that helped. And then GarageBand is, I don't know how it is now, but on
Hmm.
iOS back then, it was, you couldn't do much. It was pretty much just you could record, you could
Right.
arrange, and I think it had reverb and maybe delay,
I
and
think
that
you
was
got a
it.
little further than me because, like, that was one of those things where I opened it up and went, "I'm going back to my computer," and I see some kids out there like making beats on like iOS GarageBand. I'm just like, how are you guys doing this? So it's come a long way for sure. Just some of the stuff I've heard that was made on iOS GarageBand these days.
Yeah, I heard they added like EQ and compression and stuff, and
Yeah,
that they
it's
didn't have that back when I
right.
used it. So anyways, once I did that for a little while and got for just basically got the faith in Apple that they
Hmm.
were making DAWs compatible with voiceover.
Hmm.
That was when I was like, okay, let me get a Mac and
Let
get
me go to the
Logic.
big fish or jump into the big pond.
Yeah, and it was an investment. It definitely
Yeah.
was
Oh yeah.
I think I got like a 27-inch iMac at the time. But I got it like refurbished and it was an investment, but
Yeah, but by the way, that is a pro tip right there. If you're buying Mac, find a refurb. It's the same exact warranty as new. It comes out of the box as new, and you save a few $100s at the
absolutely.
minimum. You know.
I,
So,
I I just got another laptop, a MacBook Pro,
hmm,
and I always get like I always get refurbished, and I always get like not the latest and greatest because,
yeah,
to be honest, if you're just doing music, you don't necessarily need most of the main computing power is really for video. So you need
yeah.
you need computing power. I'm talking about like the big Mac Pros, like
Well, yeah, yeah. You
yeah, that's what
definitely
I'm
don't
talking
need
about.
like a Mac Pro or something like that. But I mean, an iMac is good. You know, a MacBook Pro is still really nice, et cetera, et cetera. And you know, a lot more stuff is relying on the GPU now. So having that discrete graphics in an iMac or the 15-inch MacBook Pro can, I say can in air quotes, have an advantage, but you may not miss it as much if all you're doing is music. But I know, like for me, because I work at 96K a lot, like I'm
Oh well, yeah,
definitely,
yeah,
I'm kind of
definitely.
hitting the wall a little bit.
Yeah, if you're working at 96K,
Yeah,
which isn't the standard yet, but
yeah.
it's still
If you want
still
to be future proof,
48K.
it's nice to kind of be able to work there because then you can drop back down to 48 or 44.1 as needed. You
Yeah, well,
know,
I can't. I've never even tried to work at 96K,
right?
but I know if I did, it wouldn't go well.
Yeah,
I already know
and
that
that's
for a
what I'm
fact.
saying. You got to understand what your goals are and what you're attempting to do, and find the machine appropriate for you at the same time. You
Most
know,
definitely,
so
most
like
definitely.
if you're just putting together a few tracks and your projects never go over 10 tracks and want like you could probably get away at an air. But if
Oh,
you're like
right.
scoring and you got 100 tracks in your project and you want to work at 96K, you're probably gonna want all the power you can afford to throw at it. So, you know, uh,
Definitely. I would 100% agree with
right.
that.
And so, you kind of, if someone's giving you advice on like, oh, you don't need this Mac or you should get this Windows computer or whatever, you find out what their workflow is or what type of stuff they're working with to see if it's kind of in the ballpark of yours.
No,
Just
that's
yeah,
a good and to put a reference out there. Like typically, my projects are usually between 20 and 30
right.
tracks or
And you're at
so, maybe a
48K.
little bit more. And I honestly, I usually keep my projects at 44, even
Right,
though I
right.
bounce 48, which doesn't
Yeah.
matter because you can't upsample. Like
Yeah,
it's not gonna all of a
exactly.
sudden become 48. But
Yeah,
you
it's
know,
not gonna make it sound better. It just means when the
yeah,
videographer imports it,
they
they don't
think
have
it's
to like fuss
48.
with anything.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they think it's 48, but it's
exactly.
not. Because to be honest, to your ear, you can't really distinguish between 48 and 44.
Yeah,
So
you have to
that's
jump like 44 to 96 before most people can even start to kind of notice something. Like those in between jumps are
definitely, and
not really that noticeable.
you can notice though between 44 and 96. Your ear can tell. There's definitely
Yeah,
a higher resolution there, but
right.
it's still not the standard yet.
Yeah, yep, yep.
But so yeah, so that's pretty much where I'm at. So once I decided, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get an iMac, get Logic. Um, from then it was a lot. There was no really resources when I first started. So it was
Right.
pretty much just me in my office doing a lot of probably yelling, frustration, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of emotions that went into, because I knew I just wanted to do music, but
Yeah, yeah. So
it just I had
you
to
had to put in the time, basically. You have to work for the suck, as I like to call it.
absolutely.
You know.
But I do think there's a benefit to learning to hear what's happening, though. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
you're literally hearing what a compressor does. Like you're not just looking for someone to tell you
Mm-hmm.
presets or whatever. I mean, you're watching
Well,
videos and you're learning. Okay, here's what the ratio, here's what the threshold is
mm-hmm.
doing. Here's
Mm-hmm.
what the release is doing, and you're learning like, okay, how to really obtain the sound you want by manipulating the parameters.
Right.
Which is there's real ultimately there's no substitute for that. If you're gonna
Yeah.
do music, you have to
You
train
have
your
to get to
ear.
that point where you can do that stuff, because understanding it is what helps you pick the right presets sometimes too down the road.
Oh, definitely,
You
definitely.
know. So you said that you put in the time to learn. Now, I learning how a compressor works and all that is kind of, I'm gonna say, secondary in a sense to like figuring out how to use a DAW and how to import a track and how to
Oh,
record, and
absolutely,
and
absolutely.
I'm assuming that's where, how did you get up to speed with all that stuff? Because I imagine that was overwhelming when you first started doing this. So, were you like on YouTube looking at YouTube videos about how to do this, and then you had to try to figure out how to translate doing that with voiceover? Like what was your method like? Is it something else or something like that?
To be honest, it pretty much was like just me opening up the key command list and be like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, record, and just going through and be like, okay,
Yep.
I would just pick a few key commands, like, okay, I need record right now, I need,
Mm-hmm.
stop, playback. It was literally just it was in steps. It
Yeah.
wasn't. I definitely didn't start with how to use a compressor. I just started on
Right.
with
Right.
composing, arranging,
Right.
duplicating tracks, copy, paste, and really
Basic
a lot of that
functionality.
was basic functionality and trial and error. Because when
Yeah.
you use voiceover, what you have to learn is what the behavior of Logic is when
Right.
when you cut. What's the behavior of Logic? And then over time,
Mm-hmm.
you realize when you cut, Logic highlights the portion of the region that just got cut, and you start to kind of pick up on little things where it's
Yep.
like,
Yep.
you cut and then you copy and then you pay, and then you start to learn the little behaviors and
Right.
intricacies of, ultimately it's just you over time, trial and error. But if I knew someone who was doing that at that time, it would have saved me probably
Oh
years.
yeah,
Like,
and I think that's something that I don't think people kind of appreciate early on is, when you can have someone kind of walk you through stuff and show you stuff and whatnot, it really really does fast track the process of learning something new like this. Take that hand over hand training. Um, you know, but I think you also touched on something else there that I think is what can kind of get people in trouble or put people off sometimes is, it's easy to get overwhelmed with something like this. So
absolutely,
you want to take those break it up into small chunks. All right, today I need to learn how to record. Look at the key commands list. What are the key commands pertinent to recording? All right, let's work on these. Let's make sure I can nail recording and get that down. And then once you commit that to memory and you feel comfortable with it, all right, how do I cut, copy, and paste? So breaking things up into chunks, I feel like, is a big step, because I feel like a lot of people, they, especially these days, they get Logic, they get Komplete Kontrol, they get this, that, and everything out at the same time, and it can be really, really overwhelming to get up to speed with all that stuff.
absolutely, absolutely.
And
And I don't recommend that people
I don't
do
either.
that. I think you should get
Get a
Logic
Mac,
and
get
just
Logic,
learn.
and learn
Absolutely,
Logic. Yep,
absolutely, because
yep.
that ultimately is
Because you can plug any MIDI keyboard into Logic and play the sounds that come with Logic. Like
definitely.
any really inexpensive to really expensive MIDI keyboard, plug it in via USB, and you can take control of the sounds in Logic really, really easily. And that's going to be a lot less
Absolutely.
overwhelming. Yeah.
And I use, I mean, I'm a native instruments user. I
Right.
have Ultimate. I have A49. I use it a lot.
Yeah.
It's good. It's not the. I like that they've made it accessible.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it isn't the greatest thing in the world. You know what I mean? But it is great. Don't get me wrong. So
Right,
it's
right.
like,
And I'm with you. Like, I'm not going to say don't get it at some point, but I feel like learn Logic, get comfortable with Logic, then when you're ready to expand, I shouldn't say when you're ready to expand, but once you're comfortable, then
absolutely.
that's when you add something new to the mix. And then, okay, now I understand how Logic works. Now I'm going to understand how Complete Control works. Because,
Definitely.
if you're new to Logic and you don't understand the difference between a patch, channel strip setting and a plugin setting, and you're trying to use Complete Control, like, you can be chasing your tail for an hour just trying to figure out how to get Complete Control instantiated on a track. So,
And the more stuff I buy, the more I realize that the stuff that comes in Logic, if you actually learn how to use the synthesizers and how to use the plugins that come with Logic, you really can get some good results.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily always about,
it's not, you're not paying for better sound just because they didn't come with Logic, basically, is what you're saying.
Right. You can get good results, but ultimately, I mean, there's an element to, shortcuts, and you don't have to learn as much routing and sound design if you just get like Massive X or something.
Right. And that's where Complete Control shines, is you can, instantiate it on a track and right from your keyboard, cycle through different settings and cycle through different, soft synths and all that stuff. And that aspect of it is great. But here's the thing that people don't realize at the end of the day is they think like, oh, because, this stuff is mapped out to the knobs on the keyboard, they can control everything. And what you can control is a tiny subset of the actual features, where with a Logic synth, go into controls view, open that thing up, and you got like access to all the parameters right there.
You really do. And that's definitely even the like, man, Contact 6, right? Or like Form, these native instrument synthesizers, they do so much more than what
those knobs on the keyboards give you.
Yeah, it's like you're not even really,
you're barely
not even
scratching the surface.
Potential. Yeah, and it almost makes me kind of like, man, there's
what am I paying for again?
Yeah, I mean, because I have software that I own that I can't even really access the fullness of what they can do, and it's that sucks.
And my argument too is drums. Like, everyone's like, oh, Abbey Road's this, Studio Rummer's that, and I'm like, yeah, but good luck multi-outing. Good luck having a pick and snare and all that.
You can't.
And control. It's like, but with a Logic stock kits, like, I can multi-out, no problem. And people be like, oh yeah, just separate by note value. That's great, but then you don't get the room sounds, you don't get the overhead sounds, you don't get any of that on its own track.
No, I definitely, every time I do acoustic drums, I use the Logic with the multi-out.
Yep.
And you, like you said, you get the drum room, and it's just a better experience. It's quicker.
And quite frankly, I think until you buy third-party drum libraries like Addictive or Get Good Drums and stuff like that, I honestly think the Logic drum sounds sound better than the stock Complete drum sounds.
I would agree 100%.
Yeah.
I would agree.
I get a lot of flack for saying that, but
no, I mean, that's what I use. I mean, I don't, and I mean, music is what I do. I mean, all the time. It's just like I'm constantly. I just do tracks. I never stop.
And that's what you're doing for your type of thing. So just to wrap up on Complete Control, we're not saying don't buy it. We're just saying understand its pros and cons, and fit it into your workflow once you're comfortable with everything else under your belt. That's kind of the way we'd approach it.
And it is a great. I do want to make sure it is a phenomenal. I am glad that I made the investment to get it. But I didn't do that first. I did it. I did everything in steps. I got Logic, just got familiar with what it had, with basic synthesis, with got familiar with what I call the essentials of music production, which is simply EQ, compression, reverb, delay, saturation. It's just basic. Those are like the pillars.
Those are your 5 effects. With those 5 effects, if you can't make something sound good yet, like, keep working on it. Because definitely. That's your building blocks right there. And now, if you can make stuff sound really good with those 5 effects, then start looking at third-party plugins if you want to enhance stuff. Not to say you need them. Start looking at third-party libraries to enhance your sound. Once again, not because you need them, but to bring new, fresh ideas and inspiration and stuff that you wouldn't have come up with what else you already have. So I look at it as far as like expanding your palette more so than, oh, I need this because I can't sound good without it.
Well, that's a great way to put it. Is exactly that, expanding your palette. Because I feel like nothing is essential in music. I feel like if you really learn what your plugins do,
Yeah.
a good producer can just take what he has and just make good music.
Yeah, a good producer can open up stock Logic and make a radio banger.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see that with with the with the new update, and they came out with the what's the girl? The Billie Eilish. Yeah, and you open them up, and it's like, wow, this is just is stock, channel strips. This is Logic stuff, and it's great, man.
It's not that far off from the actual release mix, because I don't think they mixed it. They recorded everything in Logic and they sent it off to be mixed.
Yeah.
But the fact that they made that song, everything was tracked in Logic, it's all stock Logic sounds in that song to begin with. The fact that they could take stock Logic plugins and get that close to the real mix is unreal. And
it's great.
Umbrella by Rihanna, that's Logic Drum Loop 01.
Yeah, Logic Drum Loop, yeah, definitely.
And then you have that Pharrell song, Happy, that's the Liverpool bass that's on there.
Yep.
So like stock Logic sounds are all over the radio. And
absolutely.
You don't realize it till you start going through those sounds and you're like, wait a minute, where have I heard this before?
No, absolutely.
So
absolutely.
That's why it's like Logic is, just composition wise, it's definitely the place to be. I feel like, not to take anything away from other DAWs, but that's definitely Logic's strength in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree. They give you it's just all the way around solid. I mean, from composition to the tools to create to mixing, the Logic compressors is just phenomenal. It's solid, man. Even the delays, the reverb and delay in Logic
I can't spend money on reverb and delays sometimes, because I'm just like, what are you doing that I can't already do?
No, I always come back to, I think, I really have gotten appreciation for Chrome Verb. I mean, that is such a good reverb.
Yeah.
And
Space Designer.
Yeah, Space Designer is like obviously just phenomenal, but I didn't always have an appreciation for Chrome Verb, and I think over the past year, I'm like, wow, this is great.
I just used that on a couple of mixes in the last week. I'm just like, man, I forgot about this thing.
Yeah, I like it for single tracks. Like I like Space Designer for like bus reverbs and like overall trying to create
room sounds and stuff like that. I feel absolutely. Like for that it's a little bit more realistic and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. But I like Chrome Verb when I just want to sound design on individual instruments and stuff. It usually get a really great sound.
Right. And that's where Chrome Verb shines, is when you get into sound design, or you just want something to sound really cool and you don't care about it being a realistic space as much,
Right, absolutely.
So how did you find using VoiceOver with Logic when you first got switched from iOS to the Mac? How did you find that transition?
That, for me, it was difficult. And this is why it was difficult, was because I was trying to learn both at the same time, which is a bad move. This
goes back to the Logic and Komplete Kontrol conversation we just had. Get familiar with VoiceOver, then learn
absolutely.
Logic.
Absolutely. And that's that will save you frustration and headaches. Just learn VoiceOver by itself. It take a couple weeks, not forever.
Stop using your Windows computer or anything else for a couple of weeks. Only use your Mac. Get really familiar with VoiceOver. And then once you feel comfortable with your Mac as a computer, start figuring how to use Logic, or insert in the DAW here. And I kind of echo this for the simple fact that Logic is, because it's a Mac, because it's an Apple design program. A lot of the standard things tend to work in Logic. Case in point, the way you select non-contiguous files in Finder is the same way you could select non-contiguous tracks in Logic. It's the same way you select non-contiguous regions in Logic. It's the same way you select non-contiguous items in the event list.
Yeah, definitely.
So having this understanding of VoiceOver, really helps. People say, oh, Logic is, it's too, you have to interact and stop interacting a lot, move around too much, and it's like, yeah, but if you understand, Command Accent moves you between all the open windows in an app.
Right.
You can jump between different windows really quickly to keep their focus.
Really fast.
And it's like, it's so much quicker to work that way than, oh, I got to go into the inspector. I got to stop interacting with the track headers and go into the inspector. No, just open 2 copies of the main window, leave one in the track header, leave one in the inspector, command accent between them, and it's smooth. So
that's actually something I haven't done. And hearing you say that, it's like, why haven't I done that? I should. Yeah, that's a good idea. That's a really good idea. Yeah.
And so that's what I'm saying is like, understanding voiceover really helps you understand other Mac apps. Understanding how to use your Mac really helps you understand other Mac apps, especially other Apple apps. But as a whole, other Mac apps as well, because I do the same thing in Safari. Sometimes I'll have multiple windows open instead of tabs because of what I'm doing. It's easier to switch between windows than jump between tabs.
Yeah, definitely.
So, so how did you get into the whole music licensing thing? Like, how did you find out about it? Figure out what it was? How did that all come about?
Yeah, so basically, my I guess kind of my earliest introduction to the concept of it is my brother-in-law he's a great music producer himself, songwriter and stuff like that. He's got some really great stuff, and wrote. I mean, his band was like in Rolling Stone and stuff. I mean, just he's a great music producer. Anyways, he's also a video editor, and he worked for a company in Raleigh. And he would tell me that they would get, they get music for their videos and stuff from these different sites. And so he was telling me back then, it was like telling me about Organic Music Library, and he was telling me about Killer Tracks. And he was, I was like, what
So
are
these are
things?
different websites?
So, yeah, what these are these two libraries in particular are more exclusive, more higher end libraries.
Right.
But at the time, I had never even heard. I was like, like what are you talking about? So that's when it was like, okay, what is a production music library? That was what opened up my eyes to that. I guess that would have probably been about 2014 or so.
Okay. All right. So at this point, you've been into Logic for a couple years, kind of gotten comfortable with it.
I've gotten some. I would say, obviously, when I go back and hear the music I was making now, it was horrible. But
I think we all feel that way about our art.
Great. Oh yeah, if you don't feel like that, you're not getting better.
You're not getting better, exactly.
Yeah, if you don't feel like that, you're not getting better. So it is absolutely a good sign.
Yeah, it goes back to what I said earlier. You got to work through the suck.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And so I submitted to some of the more higher end companies, and obviously didn't hear anything because my music was not good.
It wasn't up to standard yet.
Absolutely not. And so I've became familiar with what they call royalty free sites. Pond5, Audio Jungle. So then I started, submitting tracks on Pond5 and stuff, and started making some sales. And that was when it was
give us an idea, like who the audience for Pond5 is.
Pond5 primarily, well, it can be anyone.
Right.
Like I know people who get TV placements from Pond5. But that's obviously the exception.
Right, right.
But sometimes there are, TV companies that are on they have no budget left. They'll go to Pond5 and find something. But primarily it's going to be content creators, video makers, maybe small
YouTube makers, documentary makers, or YouTube content creators, documentary makers, creators. Indie films, things like that.
Yep, indie films. I mean, really, now it basically your customer on Pond5 is the whole world, because everyone now has a laptop, and some people want to do music, other people want to do videos. Absolutely. So it's like those are the people that that's a big market. It's not the flashiest, but that was a way that I got my confidence up. I started making some money like that, and I still make money from Pond5. I have tracks that don't get accepted into these other more exclusive libraries I work with. Maybe they get rejected. Instead of just letting them sit there, I mean, literally, I was going through my hard drive and I had 20 tracks just sitting there that were all rejects, and I was like, to be honest, these aren't really good enough to get into any of the libraries. So let me just put them on Pond5, So it's, and they become a source of revenue like that.
Right. And so is Pond5 like once someone decides they want to use their track, they're paying for an exclusive license, or
no, it's
royalty. Just like it's just they can use it, but other people can still go buy it and use it?
Yeah, everyone can buy it. Yeah, there's there's no real there's no exclusivity. But so
one piece of music can get you paid like 2, 3, 4, 10 times.
Oh, absolutely. I was, the funny thing is I was actually looking at my statistics on Pond5 just the other day, because it's not something I don't put much effort into it anymore. I've started to work with some other companies now, which is, where all my energy goes. But, that was a good starting point for me. But I was going on there looking at some statistics, and I think the first song I ever uploaded on there, I think so far I was going through all the sales, and it's made over $300.
Right.
So it's sold like
That's some plug and buy money right there.
Yeah, no, exactly. And you know what? That's what I tend to do when I get checks from Pond. I'll get a payment from Pond5, and it's like, okay, well, let me go see who's having a sale. Let me grab some plugins, and it's just kind of extra, extra money.
Right. But starting out, I mean, that's a nice supplement to your income to get a little extra money coming in on the side. Especially if you're on a really fixed income like, SSI or something like that. To get a little kickback a couple times a month or once a month that's on top of whatever money you already got,
And it's not going to mess up, it's unless you, over the years, you can, if you keep putting and you have literally hundreds of songs on there, then it can be, you can grow it into a pretty substantial source of revenue.
Right.
Yeah. But if you, just, and this is what I tell all my students, you have to get your chops up. And the only way you can get your chops up, you have to start projects and you have to finish projects. You do not get your chops up by just creating an idea and then moving on to the next thing. You get bored with it. You have to finish. You have to get in a habit of finishing work. And I think Pond5 is good if you say, let me finish a track a week or 2 tracks a month. Wherever you start, you have to start somewhere. And just get better.
Be kind to yourself. I mean, don't think you're going to finish a track a week when you've only been using Logic for 2 weeks.
You're not going to. It's going to take you probably a couple months.
Right.
And that's fine. And then over time, you get your chops up, you get your quality up. And now, literally, for me, it's like, all right, I get a brief. They need this by tomorrow morning. So it's like you have to write a TV ready, track in 5 hours. And fortunately, I can do that just because of experience, templates, channel strips. I've done so much stuff that I save, and it saves yourself time. And it's like, all right, let's work. You have to have a mentality of finishing. You have to know how to finish. That's a skill in itself, and that's something that cannot be overlooked.
So once you got comfortable posting stuff on Pond5 and getting that stuff out there, how did you transition to what you call these more exclusive libraries? And tell us a little bit more like what that is and then how you got into that.
Those are what they call TV film libraries. So they basically supply music to more, Hollywood, essentially, the TV film industry. You're going to be dealing more with like, cable television, sports, things of that nature. So those are the more high-end companies. Those are not, you can't just go and be using Logic for a couple months and say, here, with all stock Logic sounds, here's my music, what do you think? It's typically not going to work like that. Typically, you need to bring an album of TV, radio quality music.
Right. So it's got to sound like something that can sound that could get played on the radio if it was a radio played instrumentals.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's also, it's not only a quantity, it's a quality, and at that point it's really about being a salesman. I mean, you have to pitch yourself, your music to them. You have to grab their attention just to even get them to listen. And once you do that a couple times, you start to get your confidence up, and it's like, I don't know, you start to make a couple contacts. Then once you're in, it's like you're in. Once you start to build a resume, it's like, hey, I've had music on this, I've had music on that, I've done worked with this library. And then it's like, you start to build a resume and a name and a reputation. And, so, it gets easier.
2 things. You said an album's worth of music. So like how many tracks are we talking? What's the length for the tracks on average?
Usually 10. So at least 10 tracks. Some publishers want 12, between 12 and 14. I'd say usually 10, no less than 10 tracks for an album. And then no less than 2 minutes. Right. So if you're going over... Is there like a maximum length, like 2 to 5 minutes or something like that? Yeah, if you go over, I'd say you really don't need to go over 2.5. If you're pushing 250, 3 minutes, it's probably even
starting to get too long. Yeah,
it's starting to get too long. So you really need to say as much as you can with the composition in 2 minutes.
Right.
Give the editors.
So your modern day average pop song, basically.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because you're basically what you want to do is you want to create catchy music that sounds radio ready, that gives the editor enough options within the composition to where they can loop certain sections, you have dropouts, you have buildups, you have editing points to where they can go through, they can chop it up and they can do what they need to do with it.
Right.
But if you just send them a loop of the same thing for 2.5 minutes, it's like it's if you look at the WAV file and it just looks like the same thing, it's like they're not even going to listen to the music. It's not going to work.
Right.
There has to be dynamics. There has to be breaks in the music. The music has to build. It has to climax. It has to drop out. So it's like
so basically everything that makes a good song, just now there are no lyrics, so you can use like maybe an instrumental melody or something like that to carry it instead of vocals.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And there's obviously a place for vocal music, but I'd say the majority of what I do is primarily instrumental and primarily what they call counter leads. So like you're doing leads, but in a way that they would support.
It's not shredding and showing off. It's supporting the music under it.
Yes, exactly. You want to capture a mood and support, an emotion, support a scene to where, the scene is going to be like the lead singer. And you want to just enhance the scene.
So in a way, the lead part is more like the harmony or backing vocal more so than the lead vocal. The scene's the lead vocal. Is what you're saying.
a lot of times that's definitely the case. And also there's a thing that you'll kind of learn the more you get into the industry is you supply what's called alternate mixes.
Yep.
So it's like the full version is not the full version isn't typically what they use.
Right.
The full version is just what makes them fall in love with the music. Right. Then they typically use the version what we call the underscore or the narrative, which is where you take out all the leads, you take out anything distracting, and it just like creates a bed to go under dialogue.
Nice. And then the other thing you were talking about was making contact. So once you've been on Pond5 or what's the other one you said, Audio Jungle?
Yeah.
So once you've been doing that for a while, like how do you go about like trying to break into these exclusive libraries? Like do you have a kind of any tips you can give about making initial contact and any particular format you want to have your stuff available in, stuff like that?
Yeah, I would say number one rule, always send streaming link.
Right. So like a link on SoundCloud or something like that.
Yeah, something is SoundCloud.
Your private YouTube link.
If you have your own website, you can put streaming links on.
Right.
SoundCloud is a solid way to do it.
If you can get through their accessibility.
Right. No, that's definitely an issue. Box.com, even Dropbox. If you do MP3s, you can share the link. And I use Dropbox all the time. That's like my number one way. And as a just a rule of common courtesy, not just to all your friends, please don't send attachments to anyone. We all have enough stuff we download.
Yep.
If you want to share your music, please don't send me
even when you share it to your friends or please like a list, like a mailing list or something, don't attach your track. Just send a link. And something people should be aware of is a service called SongLink, song.link. And it basically will find your track on all the streaming services and just generate a page of links to the different services. That's a quick way to share your song if it's a release. Throw a song link instead of like sending a link to a specific service, because then people can choose what service they want to listen to the song on, YouTube or Spotify or whatever. But in this case, you want to definitely do like a Dropbox, a SoundCloud, YouTube private link. It's just something where they can check it out.
They can stream it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's number one. And then so when you actually contact, write a very cordial, personalized. You have to personalize it. So, and this is where, you need to find out who, if you're writing to the A&R of a music library, maybe you should do some research and find out who's responsible for the music. So if you find out, who's going to be checking the music, who's the A&R, who's responsible for all in-house music, maybe when you contact them, maybe do the research and write their name. Mm-hmm. So when you write their name, you say, hello, Mike, hello, John, whatever the person's name is.
Now, to whom this may concern.
Right. Because it's like, they don't want to feel like you just have an email template.
That you're sending to everybody.
This out to everyone, that you did your research. You said, this company, I saw you do a lot of music for this show, for that show. Mm-hmm. I love your release, this music, that I write a lot in that style. I think my music would be great. I'd love to work with you guys. Here's an album that I have that's exclusively available. Please have a listen. Thank you for your time and consider. You have to. It's a sales job. It's you have to do your research. You have to separate yourself from everyone else that has a computer and a laptop, and you do that not only with your music, you do it with your presentation,
Right.
you do it with how well you write. You have to separate yourself from the competition. So
And the interesting part about all this that I'm realizing, listening to you say this, is how this translates to anything else in music for the most part. If you wanna, get on a Spotify playlist, for example, it's pretty much the same thing.
definitely,
You got to figure out who's running that playlist.
yep,
Write them a nice cordial letter, link them to your song. Like why are you any different from Joe Smo? Like your music's got to hold up to what else is popular. You know what I mean? What
absolutely.
else is, if this library specializes in a certain type of music and you want to get on there, your stuff better sound on par with what else is coming out of that library.
Yeah, that's huge. It's crazy because like there's certain players. Fortunately, I just found out I had an album that was released through BMG, which
Hmm.
is like the biggest production music. That for me, that's like a dream come true.
Right.
And I actually stumbled
Congrats,
upon
man.
that.
Congrats.
Yeah, I appreciate it, dude. Appreciate that big time. But it's that is not an easy thing to happen,
Hmm.
and it doesn't happen by sending bad music. Definitely, a big part of that is knowing what you said, knowing what the quality of music that's in their catalog, knowing the style that's in their catalog, doing your research, and then pitching your music accordingly. Because like if you pitch hip hop music to publishers who primarily do rock,
Yeah.
you're going to be sitting there wondering why you got rejected. Why
Right.
why
Right.
aren't they responding to me? Because that person's saying we don't do hip hop. Why
Yeah.
are you wait? Why are you
Why are
wasting
you
my
wasting my
time?
time?
Yeah, that's
And if you become known as a time waster, your email's not even ever going to get read. So you might have rock
yeah,
music down the road, but you sent them free hip hop libraries first. So they're like, your
right.
email's going right to the trash after that.
And
You
and
know.
the problem with that is the more your emails don't get open, the more
Hmm.
your email address gets detected as spam because
Bam.
your open rate goes down. You want to have a business plan as well
Hmm.
because I mean it is a business. It's not just music.
It's called the music business, not the music friends.
Absolutely, conduct yourself as a business. Be professional.
You were talking about, you may get rejected, the first couple times. Talk to us about like how you handle rejection, working through the rejection and not giving
Oh
up
yeah,
and keep going.
that part of the game never goes away.
Yeah.
You always get rejected. I mean, I still get
So
rejected. So
like you could submit to an appropriate library. You could be submitting hip hop to a hip hop library and still get
absolutely,
rejected. Yeah.
absolutely. It's just a lot of stuff comes down to well, we just don't have a need, or we have too much of that. It's
Yeah.
like we could sign this, but it's like
You're just gonna sit in the pile.
yeah. So and a lot of times they'll do you a favor by saying, we it's good, but we just don't really have a need. Maybe check back with us a little later this year. I just got rejected the other day, but the company said, we like the music, but we're actually all of our releases are booked up for this year, but we're going to be taking considerations for albums that'll be coming out in 2021 in
Hmm.
September. Check back in with us then. So then it's like,
And that's where you
you
set a little
know,
reminder somewhere somehow
absolutely.
and
Yep.
make sure that, come beginning of September, you got an email into these people.
Exactly, because you have the lead.
Hmm.
Now it's like, okay, I got rejected, but I have a lead for a future. So now I know, after I'm done with these cues I'm working on now that are going to be for a certain publisher that I need to be submitted on Monday, I'm going to start getting together an album so that come September, at least halfway through September, I'm going to say, hey, such and such, you
Remember
told me
me?
you guys were considering albums in September. Here's an album.
Yeah.
And that's how it's like, okay, this guy's making my job easy because he's not just saying, here's 3 tracks,
Hmm.
do you like them? Then if they like them, it's like, yeah, well, it's only 3 tracks.
Yep.
We need a collection in order
Right.
to move these. So it's like, have an album ready.
You just talked about a case where they're positive, like, hey man, we like your stuff, but we ain't got room for you right now. What about if you just flat out get rejected? Maybe you don't hear back from them at all, et cetera, et cetera. Do you have any means of following up with them in that case, or
Yes. I usually, so if I don't hear anything, I follow up in 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I don't hear anything again, I follow up one more time as it's just a final follow up. Some libraries are really big and they're really busy. So
Mm-hmm.
if they're like that, then most likely you're not going to hear back from them in 2 weeks. So
Yeah.
send a reminder in 2 weeks and then send another reminder 2 weeks later. So that
Right.
would be a month from the initial submission. And you need to keep track of your pitching, keep track of your submissions, know what dates you're sending, know who you're sending to. You need to keep track of what's getting rejected from where. And to be honest, that happens a lot. There's been a lot of times where I've sent emails out and just simply never heard back. Fortunately, nowadays, I'm getting at least more feedback, even when it gets rejected. It's typically not because the music is bad. It's typically because they just don't have a need for it. So they'll at least send a courtesy,
Mm-hmm.
thank you for taking interest in us, but, we really don't have a need for this at the time. And then it
Right.
stinks. It stinks, but then you just have to keep writing music and keep pitching.
Right.
You don't.
But in a sense, that's kind of confirmation that you're doing something right as well. So you got to be able to look at the bright side of what you're getting. Obviously, confirmation doesn't pay your bills, but
Right.
you got to kind of use that as a motivation to keep going. Also,
Definitely, because this business in the beginning is very mental, because
Mm-hmm.
you don't the money isn't really up front, at least at first, until you start to get up to like the really high end places that will pay you up front
Yeah.
just to have your music in their catalog. That usually comes later, and you definitely
Right.
have to work. You have to
So
give
it's a
yourself
numbers
to.
game.
Yeah, it's
The more
absolutely a
the more
numbers
stuff you
game.
have out there, the more passive income comes in down the road.
Absolutely.
Right.
And before you know it, it's like, okay, I'm getting, royalties are coming in. Now you have, hundreds of tracks in the system.
Mm-hmm.
And I typically, I set goals. Like, I set numbers of how many tracks I want to do a week or a month.
Mm-hmm.
And I make sure at the end of the year, I need to, at least be doing like 150 tracks a
So
year.
to go back to something you said, now the stuff that doesn't get picked up, you might throw it on Pond5 or a site like that eventually. Do you
Yeah,
have like a
absolutely.
time frame for, like, do you first try to resubmit it to a different library first or something like that? Or do
Yeah,
you wait till the end of the year and then whatever you don't use by the end of the year you throw on a royalty free site?
Yeah, so it's different. So say for example, I had a brief for a publisher that they want like a style of music that they call electro funk. So basically,
Mm-hmm.
what it is like a blend of jazz and like early hip hop.
Right, right.
So I did some tracks. Some of them got in, some
Mm-hmm.
of them didn't. The ones that didn't was honestly because they weren't really, hindsight, they weren't really what they were asking for.
Yeah.
And, I wasn't really hitting the mark. They
Mm-hmm.
told you they knew what they wanted, and I didn't really hit the mark. And so after analyzing the music, it's like, I can take these tracks, which are an obscure genre, right? And I can try and put these in an album and send it to another publisher. But to be honest, I'm not going to write an album of music like this.
Like that,
It's
right.
like it's just a random track. So in that case, it's like these are what I call candidates for non-exclusive
Mm-hmm.
or either royalty-free sites. It's like I'm not going to do an album. To be honest, I can try and pitch them to other libraries, and I have like a network of exclusive publishers I work with,
Mm-hmm.
and I know what they do. I know what type of placements they get. I know what type of music they need, and honestly, I'll assess the tracks and say, are these good enough? Are these
Mm-hmm.
actually good enough to get in? And
Somewhere else.
I can be honest, with my
Yeah.
own music, I'm not emotionally attached to my stuff. A
And
track,
that's big. That's big right there.
you have to learn that, because
Yeah.
you realize that one track doesn't make or break you in this business. One track
Mm-hmm.
essentially is nothing. You need a lot of tracks. So you can't be so emotionally invested in
Right.
your music that you make bad business decisions.
You have to care enough to want to make the best music, but not care enough that you get offended every time one of your babies are told they're ugly.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. Like, honestly, that is so a nail on the head.
You kind of got to understand A, the music, but B, understand what your network is looking for, the different people in your network is looking for.
Definitely.
And then,
Definitely.
okay, yeah, this doesn't really fit anybody else's bag, so I'm going to just throw these on a royalty-free site and run with it, So a big part of it is A, understanding the music that you're making, understanding how it fits, and B, understanding your network and understand what your network is looking for. And that's where, like you said, know what each library is, put in the time to do a research, go back to what we said earlier, break it up into little chunks, like focus on a library at a time. Once you build a relationship with one library, okay, now let's work on another library, because this is someone that can passively interact with, so to speak.
Definitely.
And over time, in the course of a year, you might have 3 or 4 libraries that you're working with now. But
Right.
then you got to understand
Right.
what each of those specialize in and what's going to be appropriate to send where, et cetera, et cetera.
Each library may know me as someone different.
Yeah.
So like I'll have like one library, like I'm the cinematic hip hop, dark, like crime hip hop, or like sports hip hop guy. And then to
Right.
what need do they have at the time?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you have to be able to do different stuff. I mean, you definitely
Right.
You want to make a living. At a certain point, you're only competing against yourself.
Right.
But
And,
you know,
this is where you get to have fun and where different acts and make different types of music. So if you're in a dubstep mood, you get to focus on that. But then, you know, you got to find a library that accepts that sort of stuff. If you're in a hip hop mood, you get to focus on that. But then, you know, you also have to figure out how to make that viable as well. You know, find a library that's into that sort of stuff. So if you're the type of musician that loves dabbling in all different styles of music, this is definitely something where it's encouraged in a sense. And
absolutely,
you know, you can be, like you said, you can be the hip hop guy in one place, the cinematic guy in another place, the dubstep guy in a third place, and spread the wealth around and spread your love of music around that way.
Having said that, before I would say, you know, get good at all those, you need to master one. You have to have one that is like, okay, you know, this guy, because there's a lot of people do music. So you have to be better than other people, at least the majority of the competition, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying
you got to be on par with the top of the tops, basically, in that one, at least one thing.
Yeah. At least one thing, because that's what's going to get you in the door.
Yeah.
And then once you're in the door, then it's like, oh, okay, they'll send out, hey, we need, you know, rock hybrid, and then you come with a rock track, like, wow, this guy, cool. You know, you gotta get your foot in the door with what you're best at.
Yeah.
And then you can expand.
So start out with your best work. You know, start with trying to build a network, a connection with one library, and once you get that, rinse, repeat, and try to build up your connections and your track count over time.
And rinse and repeat is the motto.
Yeah.
Because that's the plan. That you know, the plan is you write music, you pitch music, you sign music, and you do it over again. That's it. That's all. That's the whole business. You just have to be aggressive. You know, you have to really work. You have to be cranking tracks. You have to find ways to be fast. You know, be professional, be on par with the competition. So rinse and repeat, man. That's it.
So you were saying in the write up that you did for the website, you're talking about investing, and you mentioned that earlier. You're saying that, you know, the better you got, the more you invested. You want to talk about like what investment looks like, whether it be time, money, etc., and how you felt investing in yourself got you to a better place?
So if you're going to be professional about music, obviously you have to have a computer, right? That goes without saying. I know DAW-less music was a fad, but you're not going to be writing.
Yeah, you're not going to be making tracks on your 4-track recorder for this type of work.
DAW-less music is for people in their garage, just like having fun, right? If you want to do this, you're going to need a DAW. You need a computer. You need a DAW. Now, what type of music do you do? Are you going to be doing acoustic music? Are you going to be recording live instruments? If so, the next thing you need to invest in is a solid audio interface.
Right.
You know, are you going to be mainly software? If you're doing mainly software, MIDI instrumentation, you need studio monitor. You know, so you have, you know,
studio
if you
monitors or decent studio monitor level headphones, if you're in a place where you can't make a lot of noise.
Right. Definitely. I would say if you can go the monitor route, but obviously definitely. Everybody's in a different situation.
Definitely. You can make headphones work, but it's going to take a lot more work up front. Monitors will make your life easier.
Mixing in headphones. I absolutely hate it.
I've had to get used to it. I'm with you.
Yeah, but it like you said though, sometimes I mean it's necessary. So you got to do what you got to do. You know, learn how to mix on whatever headphone. But you're gonna need something.
Yeah, you definitely want to be able to run your mix through speakers before you submit it somewhere, because a lot of people don't realize how you're going to spot things on speakers that you're never going to hear on headphones. You know?
Definitely, absolutely.
So yeah, I definitely 100% agree with you. Even if you can't work on speakers all the time, have a decent pair that you can throw stuff on before you send it anywhere.
Definitely. Yeah, I reference on everything. So I have my main studio monitors, which I use, which are inexpensive, but they're really great. I would recommend them to anyone.
Which one are you using for monitors?
Kali LP6s.
Oh, I've heard so much about those.
I love them. The low end response is phenomenal.
Right.
I was using Presonus prior to that. They were
I'm not trying to crap on anybody,
okay.
but for the price, there's way better stuff you can do.
I would agree.
My personal favorite is the HS8s from Yamaha.
Those are great.
The HS5s are good too. I like the HS8s. They're not flattering at all. So if you make your mix sound good on those, they translate like nobody's business.
Yeah, those are great. Those are great.
I've not heard the LP6s yet, but I've heard everyone rave about them, so I really want to try them out. Another one I found that's really good, if you guys are north of the border in Canada, your national chain, Long McQuaid, they have a store brand, Yorkville Sound. Their YSM smokes anything sub $500. Hands down.
I've never even heard of that. So that's
I only know this because I visit Canada from time to time, and we went monitor shopping a couple times and just tried some stuff out. And like sub like $1,000, I'd say these things smoke anything else.
That's great. That's great.
I can't compare them to the LP6s, but anything else, the Yamahas, the Presonus, and a pair of the 8-inch is, I want to say, like sub 500.
Yeah,
easily,
that's great.
Like well below.
That's great.
So,
that's great.
If you can get your hands on those, definitely. But yeah, the LP6s, the Yamaha HS series. I can't. Those are the LPs are like what, like 300? I want to say for a pair, right?
Yeah, I think mine was like 330 or something like that.
Right.
So yeah, they're in that price range. So you know, and the thing is, I think that you can get great mixes from a lot of sub $500 monitors. I think the main thing is when you get your whatever, and this applies to any listening system, any mixing system. I think the number one thing you need to do is listen to music through your
on
mixing.
That system.
Yeah, know what a good mix sounds like through your monitors, through your headphones. Take notes, reference, because that's ultimately what you want to get to. And obviously, if you have like a tiny little like room that's like an 8x8, you need small speakers.
Yeah,
maybe headphones are better. Yeah, absolutely. You don't get big speakers because it's going to give you an inaccurate representation of.
And the only thing you kind of got to be aware of with those smaller speakers is your low end might drop off a little bit. So that's where it might help to have some headphones to check on. But like from what I've heard, those LP6s, like the low end is pretty tight on those still.
And for me, I mean, I do a lot of hip hop, so it's pretty. I have to be able to.
You got to make sure that low end hits.
Definitely. Different strokes for different folks. It's not one solution, but you're gonna need something though.
Worst case scenario, a pair of iLouds will be a nice place to start.
Those are great.
Yeah,
but those are gonna run you the same price
as the LP6s. Basically, they're more portable, if anything.
Definitely.
And what are you doing for interface?
I have a Presonus.
One of their 2 in 2 out deals, I'm assuming.
It's the iTwo. Yeah, it's the iTwo. The new, whatever the newest one is.
Right. The Focusrite 2 iTwo is another popular one. I like the Behringer stuff a lot. The UMC 202 and 404 is ridiculously stable and good and everything for the price. So
yeah,
so there are free choices right there.
And those are relatively inexpensive. And I don't do a lot of I don't do much audio recording.
But that lets you plug a mic in if you need to record something, plug a guitar in if you need to record something. If you're mostly primarily electronic bass, any of those, dual input, single input type audio interfaces around, the $100 to $200 price point is going to be a good place to start.
Yeah, definitely.
And like if you're mostly a MIDI musician, like feel free to start out with a decent keyboard first, or there's some. I say some because you kind of got to be careful here. There's some decent USB microphones if all you ever needed just a microphone to record vocals once in a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And even I would say, even if you're primarily MIDI and not doing audio, before you even get an interface, just get monitors and just run them through the RCA jack.
Yeah.
That would even be more, because I got to be honest. Listen, I do music all the time. I'm just saying, I don't really notice much difference between my audio through the RCA jack and through the audio interface.
It's very slight, but you don't really notice it until you start to step up to like the really higher end interfaces.
Definitely.
But I'm not going to recommend someone go get an Apogee Element if this is like their first attempt at recording either.
No, absolutely.
It's not needed at that point. If you get really serious about it and you want to up your input, then by all means, spend the money down the road.
Definitely. Absolutely. We just want to get you started.
Yeah, if there's no reason, and there are plenty of commercial release stuff that would track on these inexpensive interfaces, because what a lot of people don't realize is the $100 interface now, the 1 input, 2 input $100 interface we're using now, like in the 70s, 80s, 90s, they would have killed for that quality.
Definitely.
So like just because it's the inexpensive stuff now doesn't mean it's garbage.
Oh,
It's
definitely,
way better
definitely.
than the pro studios had in
Yeah,
like the
absolutely.
90s. So yeah, that's definitely a good place to start. So you're saying get a computer, learn a DAW, get some speakers, and then from there, if you're primarily going to be doing, acoustic music or even electric music, with guitars and bass and
Right. Recording live instruments.
right, recording live instruments, get an audio interface. If you're mostly MIDI, get a MIDI controller first, and then get a tiny audio interface just to interface, between your computer and your monitors and all that stuff. Because even for like latency, it will make a difference. Even if the sound quality doesn't
Right.
improve as
It
much,
does. Absolutely.
yeah, for latency, it will make an improvement to have an audio interface over using your built-in output. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And then, so what about like time training lessons, any of that stuff? Is
Yeah,
there?
I'm a huge advocate of, get professional feedback. So, and this is something I did with, I hired somebody.
Mm-hmm,
I got them to sit down and teach me, what are their tricks? What are their tricks
mm-hmm,
to mixing? What are their tricks to mastering? What are their tricks to music licensing? And to be honest, I mean, you can go on YouTube and you can learn a lot of stuff,
mm-hmm.
but there's something about having a catered, learning program by somebody who's doing it, that's listening to your music, that's telling you what's wrong with it. Here's how you fix it. Here's
Right.
what you need to do.
Here's
And
how
then
you
and
work
then
around this one problem you ran into while you're trying to do something specific.
absolutely, it's
Yeah.
very catered. So I mean, that type of in that one-on-one environment, I feel like is the best. You excel the
Right.
most in that situation. So
Yeah, and I
um,
mean, I'll even say the same thing if I can work a shameless plug in here. But even on this YouTube channel, there's a lot of content that kind of, if you want to piece it all together yourself, or if you just need a quick tip here or there, it's gonna be great to get you sorted out. But then booking like a one-on-one lesson, you're gonna fast track that process between
absolutely,
figuring out where to get started and how to get to a finished product a lot quicker than,
definitely,
oh, do I do it in this order or that order, and trying to guess and onesie twosie put it together on your own. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, some people prefer to learn that way, and like you say, open up the README file and open up the help file, open up the key commands, and put it together. And if you got, and this is another trade off that I don't think people appreciate. Time is the only non-renewable commodity we have.
right,
You know,
absolutely,
and so the question is, if you have more time than money, then yeah, put the time in and learn it on your own and figure it out. But if you have a little bit of money, you can really fast track this and get to that end goal that sounds a lot better, a lot sooner, in a lot less time. So
absolutely,
it's really how you want to spend your time, how you want to spend your money, and where you fall in that equation. But time is the one thing we can never get back. So the more
absolutely.
wisely you can use it, the better. And that's where investing in yourself and, like you said, getting a professional. Finding someone who is at the level you want to get to. Hey, can I pick your brain? Like how did you make these connections? How did you get your mix sounding this way? How do you handle these things in your mix? Et
Right,
cetera, et cetera.
absolutely.
And I feel like even so, get into communities. Like kind of like some of the WhatsApp communities that we have. Talk to people that are doing it as well. Ask questions. Get to know how other people are doing stuff. But be a part of the community. Share back when you figure stuff out. Share what you
Yeah,
learn. Share how
absolutely,
you do things too. And and because you get out of it what you
definitely.
put into it. Um, so yeah, do you have any resources that you recommend for people that want to learn how to do? Like is there like a YouTube channel or like a course you recommend, or just places you think people can go to start?
Um, for music licensing.
Let's start with production because you got to get your production game up before you can even get into music licensing. So let's start there.
Do you know who Edgar Rothman is?
No, I've not heard that name.
Edgar Rothman is a guy who writes like manuals for Logic.
Okay.
If you're using Logic, you got to get. I mean, his stuff is so good. They're so thorough. And then
Does he do like
obviously,
the one of those kind of like the manual that should have been in the box type books,
right?
basically?
Yeah, he does basically stuff like that, but not not the. It's not the Logic manual, but he write his stuff on Logic is so phenomenal.
Okay.
And he has stuff on Pro Tools as well. I mean, this guy, he's phenomenal, and
I gotta check this guy out.
the way he puts stuff is great, and he gets And then obviously
Are
from
these
our
books? Is this a
perspective,
website? Like what kind of content
most of
is
his
this?
stuff is books. So you
Okay.
you know you get PDFs, and it's going to come with session files where you can load up and try to follow and stuff. Now, obviously, we are being visually impaired. We do stuff with voiceover, so that's
Yeah.
another curveball. So now it's like
So now you got to translate that stuff into voiceover language.
exactly, and
Right.
that's where you come into play. People really need to and this is the approach I've taken is I've went to now I'm starting to really make it a mission to connect with the visually impaired people to learn
Right.
more about tips because I'm blind. So I
Yeah.
need to know what I can do as a blind person to work
Mm-hmm.
faster. But then I also go to pros to learn how to be a pro. You know what I mean? So I do both. It's like I go here to learn how to be professional. I go here to learn how to be blind. And you're going to need to
Do
tap
both.
into different wells to
Mm-hmm.
be complete all the way around. So
And
obviously
no, I
there's
do the same thing too. I look at a lot of like standard, mainstream sources of things, but then it's nice to have the blind community where we can trade voiceover tips and trade techniques for
absolutely
doing stuff from the keyboard as
absolutely.
well. So yeah, anyone else you'd like to shout out?
As far as YouTube, I like a lot of Dave Pensado stuff. And if you use Logic and you're not
Mm-hmm.
checking out like MusicTechHelpGuy,
Oh, that guy is unstoppable.
yeah, you really should be on that.
Yeah.
A new one by a friend of mine named Eddie Gray, really great producer, really successful in sync licensing and stuff. He has a channel called Modern Creative.
Okay. Modern creative.
And his stuff is really good. He has a lot of great Logic tips and a lot of great music production tips.
Right on.
And it's a newer channel, but the content is second to none, definitely.
Right.
And then obviously Warren from is it Mix Like a
Produce Like a Pro.
Produce Like a Pro.
Yeah.
Good stuff. I mean, really practical, really good.
That's kind of on the Pensado level, just kind of high level overall, like get your production chops up type stuff. Like
that's probably
not so much DAW
specific
stuff.
Accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then on the DAW specific, I mean, dude, if you're visually impaired and you're not checking out like Logic.band, you're probably crazy. And listen,
plug.
I've been doing music for a long time.
Right.
And I get a lot from the Logic.band stuff.
Right on.
One thing I do want to say this, you have to balance learning with working.
You got to take what you learn and go put it in something and then go back to the learning well, then go back to the working well,
And you don't want to be a professional student.
Yeah.
So like you can't always just be learning. At some point you have to take what you know and finish work. If you're a producer and you've never finished a track,
right.
You should probably go finish something soon to make that a habit. Like you have to, and that's why I do this with myself is I only allow myself a certain amount of time to learn. And then after that, it's like, okay, I have to work. So whatever I already know, that's going to have to get the job done. Yeah.
Yeah. Another good one that I've stumbled into within the last year is Why Logic Pro Rules.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
That guy has a lot of excellent, very pro Logic type tips. That's another DAW specific. I think hands down, MusicTechHelpGuy and Why Logic Pro Rules are the two best kind of mainstream Logic channels out there. I'll definitely try to get links to all that stuff in the description for this as well. How do you deal with working to visual content? Because a lot of music licensing stuff is going to end up in videos. Like, do you have any? Is there anything that you have to do on your end? Anything you got to be aware of?
No, mainly what you need to do for writing for libraries is you don't usually write. You don't score to picture. So basically, what you do is you write your compositions in an editable fashion. So that there's definitely tricks of the trade that you have to do in order to make your tracks editable, concerning having certain breakpoints, different, varying degrees of intensity, building, give the editor stuff to work with and make it to where, if they want to just take these 4 bars, they can just cut that out and loop it.
So do you provide like BPM info with your tracks when you submit them?
Yeah, typically they'll want BPM. They'll some want key, and then there's a whole system of like metadata that comes along with it where you
makes sense.
You need to supply with not only the instrumentation but the overall mood and.
So do you ever supply multi-tracks as well, like stems or multi-tracks?
Sometimes you have to supply stems.
Okay.
So, and then there's another aspect of you really got to know your DAW. You got to know how to export stems. You got to make sure you export your stems, but you have your master chain bypass because you can't send out super hot, limited stems. Yeah, because they come out weird when you run like one track through a mastering.
And that goes back to one of the biggest misconceptions is understanding the difference between stems and multitracks. Stems is really where, like you're not exporting like the kick drum and the snare drum on as individual files, but you're exporting like your drums as a stereo wave files. All the guitars are the stereo wave files, all the pianos are the stereo wave files. So you have the different instrument groups broken up into individual files, so they can drop that in their workstation. And it's like, okay, for this section where there's dialogue, I'm going to mute the vocal, I'm going to mute the lead instrument, I'm going to mute whatever. Right. But then when it's just like a montage scene, I can unmute the vocal or the lead instrument. And like you hear that on TV all the time where there's dialogue, Absolutely. Popular song, like it's just an instrumental. But then like when they stop talking, like the vocals fade back in and the vocals get really loud and take over while it's like all visuals on the screen. So, Absolutely. So that makes sense. And then multi-tracks are generally, they're going to want, individual files for everything. The kick drum is its own file, the snare is its own file.
So you'll typically, I haven't had a lot of libraries ask for the actual
multi-tracks. They usually want stems, right?
But, well, they definitely always want stems 100% of the time. So whether it's like, pretty much they'll want like a version with no leads, then they'll want only the drum and bass and effects, then they'll want, no drums, no drums, no leads, just like the core, so they'll some want 60-second cut downs, 30-second cut downs, just to sting out.
Right.
And
so there's like transition effects and stuff, or bumpers coming back in from commercials.
Exactly. So you need to know, definitely you need to know your DAW. You need to know, how to export the stems, how to export the multi-tracks, how to set your project up in a way, how to, get familiar with project alternatives, creating different cut down. I mean, you need to know your DAW. So there's a lot, you got to put your work in, definitely.
And do you work from the template yourself? Is that how you save some time? Do you have stuff set up a certain way?
I work with templates. So I'll have my template and no matter, I'll have genre templates. So depending on the genre I want to write in. And then I'll have like my mix. I have, all my drums already grouped together, my chords and pads already grouped together, my leads already grouped together. So that way when I do my edits, I can just mute the lead bus, and then it's like, okay, here's the underscore version. Right. I can mute the lead bus, I can mute the effects bus, and then it's like, it's instead of having to go through each individual track and mute the ones I want, and mute the ones I don't want. So I've realized that since I do this a lot, I'm going to save myself a lot of time, even if I just have the routing of the template set up to where I have all my parallel chains, I have my groups already grouped together. It saves me hours upon hours of time.
So what are some of the different ways you're talking about, like Pond5 versus these different libraries? Are there any other ways within the music licensing game that people can take advantage as well, especially, early on to kind of generate some income?
Yeah, I think the best way early on is to target the royalty-free sites,
right? Okay.
Or like the micro licensing sites, because typically,
what's an example of a micro licensing site?
Micro licensing typically is like a lot of those. So there's certain sites now that sell like subscription based plans, right? So it's like pay us $20 a month, you can have unlimited access to our catalog. Now that's not great for composers. Because it really devalues the price. So basically,
that's kind of streaming music for licensing.
Oh, but the quality's bad. The music isn't good, but it is a way to get you at least working toward a goal, right? Like you don't want to do that forever.
That's the thing too. To go back to what you're saying, if your quality is above everything else in that library, you're kind of allowing yourself to rise to the top. In that type of situation, so use it as a way to build up yourself. And then once you realize, I'm kind of getting to the top of this heap, start looking at getting into the exclusive licensing heap, so to speak.
Definitely. And so, I would target the royalty free, and there's so many royalty free libraries now, and I could give you a long list. But the thing is, do your research, and if everybody just gives out all the information for free all the time, then it's like everybody's just going to go and just like, the thing that's going to separate you is doing the research.
The thing that's going to separate you is putting in the work, period. Because
definitely,
like information is free, and I find sometimes there's this notion we have, to go back to your point about investment, where like if you pay for the information, like you were saying, you paid a mentor to kind of teach you the game, so to speak. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like when you put yourself in that position, you tend to, well, I just spent how much money on this? Like, I better use this information. I better get my money.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
sometimes when information's free, people kind of overlook it sometimes and don't realize how valuable it is, and don't
Definitely.
put the work
Definitely.
in behind it. So definitely, we gave you a couple examples of a couple of good sites to start with, but expand your horizon, find some other stuff, because they're not exclusive. So there's no reason you can't have it on Pond5 and Audio Jungle and every
Right.
other site out
On
there.
all of them. Absolutely.
And build up your resume that way. And then the more and this is where efficiency comes into play. The more of them you're on, the more, let's say you set Safari up or whatever web browser you use, and like auto log you into a lot of these places. You can just spend like an hour every couple of weeks, just boom, hit every site and upload your stuff again.
Absolutely. Yep.
So
Yep.
yeah, get learn all your tools well. Like figure out how to use a password manager or something like that, so that you can quickly log into sites and bounce around and take care of your administrative tasks
Absolutely.
quickly.
Absolutely. And it's if you go non-exclusive, the administrative work is a lot.
Yeah.
To get on
Yeah.
all these sites, make sure you have your spreadsheets with your metadata, your keywords, your descriptions. I
Hmm.
mean, you don't want to redo this every time.
Exactly.
You just want to, copy the work you've already done and then paste it.
And
So to
paste it
save you
everywhere
time.
else.
Yeah.
Yeah. And talk to us about your time management, because I mean, you've got a family, if you don't mind me saying.
Yeah, I do. Wife and kids. Yeah.
Right. And so, like, you got to make time for family as well. And so, like, how do you balance your time between administrative, between making music, between maintaining your contacts? Because that is actually part of the job, is, reaching out to people and keeping in touch with people,
Absolutely. Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
making them, be top of mind with you. So talk to us a little bit about that and how you kind
Yeah,
of keep everything
the way
together.
I do, because I have, as you said, I have children, and then with COVID, we have our kids at home, so I'm doing
Yeah.
homeschool with my son during the day. So that's, that takes up a lot of time, and
Hmm.
so pretty much what I do is I have goals for the week, and
Hmm.
then I break the goals well, I do monthly goals. What's my goal for the month? Then I break that down into weekly, what I need to finish each week to make sure I meet that goal. And then I do that, break it down into days. So a lot of times my schedule is, I'll either stay up late and work or get
Hmm.
up early and work. It's whichever I have
Do.
to do, and then work throughout the day. And I also work every day.
Right.
Like I don't have day there. I don't do days off. So it's like, but in order to get enough hours in,
Hmm.
to where I'm making sure I'm doing at least 6-7 hours of music a day.
Right.
And sometimes it's I get up at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock before everyone's up, do a couple hours, then get the kids up, get them ready for school,
Hmm.
feed them, start school. Then do some
Right.
more work, do lunch, and then so I wind up breaking it up. So I definitely I wear myself out.
Right.
Um,
But,
and
in reality, your average job is going to be 7 to 8 hours a day too. So,
definitely,
that's something people
definitely.
got to keep in mind. You can sit at a desk, helping someone else realize their dreams, or you can sit at a desk in your room trying to realize your dreams.
Absolutely.
So what are some of your like administrative tools as well? I mean, if you have anything else to add on the time management, go right
Yeah.
ahead. But what are some of your administrative tools also?
Well, for me, because for me, the simpler stuff is the better.
Hmm.
So this is a big reason why I've chosen to work exclusive.
Hmm.
And mainly because it's less clutter. So like when you go non-exclusive, right? Say I do 150 tracks a year, and which is typically what I do, at least 150 a year. And I go non-exclusive. So then I'm working with however many different libraries. You have to upload all those tracks to all these
Those
different sites.
libraries.
And it just, for me, it gets to be, you spend more time on the administrative stuff.
Hmm.
Whereas if you go exclusive, those tracks are unique to that one library. So you really only have to do the administrative stuff
Administrative work
the
stuff
one
once.
time. Yeah. So for me, that, a lot of people don't like the exclusive thing. For me, I like it because you get more of a return in the long
On the
run. And then,
investment.
yeah, and then also it's less administrative stuff. So I find that, a big help in the organization part is less things to organize. If you have all these different tracks and all these different sites, and you have to, it just, for me, it's just like, it's overwhelming. So the less clutter, the better
Hmm.
for me. And then I keep my administrative stuff very simple. I work exclusive, so I just have folders for the exclusive libraries that I work with.
Mm-hmm.
And after I sign it to the library, I just put the tracks in the folder to keep track of them that way
Mm-hmm.
with whatever metadata I wrote up for the track in case I need it later on.
So is that like in a text file in the folder with the tracks as well?
Yep,
Or?
it'll be in a numbers spreadsheet. I'll
Okay.
have, and not every library needs the metadata. So
Mm-hmm.
for the ones that do, I'll just have like the album, and then I'll have the track list with the description for each track, and then keywords for each track and genre and stuff like that. Just to keep, because a lot of times certain publishers ask for all that.
Mm-hmm.
So when they send you the contract, they want you to give them the description and the BPM and the stuff they need to put it into their system.
Right. So you use numbers for a lot of that. Do you send them the numbers spreadsheet or the spreadsheet, or is that just?
I export it as an Excel file.
Right.
So
But that's what I meant. Right. Do you send them the spreadsheet itself, which, I mean, an Excel file still, you send them a spreadsheet.
Well, it varies because a lot of times some companies want the actual Excel file
mm-hmm.
of all the metadata and stuff, and other companies actually just want you to put that information on the contract.
Right.
So like when they send you the contract, they want the title of the track, your PRO, your PRO number, and then
mm-hmm.
description, what it sounds like, if it sounds like something, what genre. So it really just depends on the company.
Gotcha. And so it's basically just organized folders. You use a spreadsheet over, say, like a text file for your personal preferences. I'm assuming that is. And that's basically it. Just really simple stuff.
Pretty much it. Very basic. I keep stuff, not too cluttered.
Right.
But I know people that have a really extravagant setup because they are really active with a lot of different companies. Me, I try to keep it just exclusive, and
mm-hmm.
even my Pond5 account, I even made that exclusive.
Right.
So even the music I have on Pond5, I took it off other sites.
Right.
Just because I don't.
You don't want to have to keep track of it.
Yeah, and I don't have the time to invest in non-exclusive account. Like that's not where my time goes. So I don't want.
And this goes back to the time versus money thing. It's like, how much time do you have to invest in X?
Definitely.
Because the more you focus on the big wins, the bigger return on investment you can get,
Definitely.
So yeah, no, definitely. And do you mind just kind of touching briefly on a PRO, and should you have one, does it not matter?
Yeah. So what a PRO is, they're responsible. It's a performing rights organization. So they're responsible for collecting your royalties worldwide. So whatever piece of work, when you do it, the work gets registered under, there's two sides. There's the writer share and the publisher share.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do work for a music library, which essentially is a publisher,
mm-hmm.
they retain 100% publishing, you retain 100% of the writer share.
Mm-hmm.
So when that music gets placed, your royalty agency pays them the publishing share and you the writer share.
Okay.
So the only way you can receive that is if you are registered with the PRO. Now, with music, though, there's a lot of media outlets that don't want to pay royalties, like streaming outlets and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So pretty much what they're doing with certain companies is they want what they call non-PRO music. Mm-hmm. So they want only composers who aren't registered with PROs. So that way they have music with no copyright, with no owner, that they can sell as many times as they want. And basically they'll just buy it from you once. And then that's it. That's
right.
Your
so you
payment.
Get paid up front, but then they're hoping to make back that money, make back their investment of buying it off of you by selling it a number of times, basically.
Yeah. They pretty much buy it on the cheap and then turn it into a lot more money. So that's.
So is that kind of the Pond5 situation, or does Pond5 still pay your royalties?
Yeah, Pond5 is what they call rights reserved. So
yeah.
Pond5
so you still reserve the rights to it, but they give you a kickback every time someone wants to use it.
Yep, you get paid what they call a sync fee. So every time someone purchases it, you get on my Pond5 account, I made it exclusive, so you get like over 60% of all sales.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you go non-exclusive, it's only half. Which if you're only doing royalty free stuff, maybe you want to work with 10 libraries.
Yeah.
For me, that's not the best move, but everyone has a different path.
Right. You got to figure out what that looks like for you, and that's going to be a little trial and error, and once again, invest in the time to figure out what path is going to work for you.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think that's one of the nice things about this. It's a lot of work. If you know, from what you've been saying, it's a lot of work, but it's very rewarding work. And it's very much a choose your own adventure. You know, if you're the type of person that likes to be everywhere and everything to everyone, you can be as multiple, you know, royalty free libraries as you want to be. But, you know, if you want to specialize and hone in and niche down, you can do that too and figure out, you know, that path and stick to a very strict, rigid path, and anything in between is what it's sounding like.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot, and I mean, man, it's such a deep topic. But now there's like in-store streaming where they can't stream real music, so now there's all these like sites popping up that are taking on artists that music is solely for, like hotels. You know, you go in like the Disney store or something. You know, you'll hear, or I went and, you know, you go in Build-A-Bear and you hear all these pop tracks, but they're not from the radio, but they're cool. It's like, I don't know this music. And you find out that they subscribe to all these like in-store streaming. So there's like so many ways now to get paid for music.
Yeah.
You just got to do your research and try stuff out.
And you know, to that point, I mean, to go back to something Herb from Pensado's place said a lot, nowhere in the world is silent. Like, sound is everywhere. And somebody is making that sound that you're hearing in every piece of content. And that could be you, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you got to figure out where that fits in for you. How do you get there? And like you said, start out slow, start out, you know, your first couple of tracks may not be your best, but, you know, they can be of use to somebody on a site like Pond5, like a content creator that just needs like some background music or something, you know? So there is definitely a place for everything. Start somewhere. As you get better and better and better, you know, look into how to transition. And a lot of this advice, as I said earlier, seems like it's in line with what other business people say, other musicians say. You know, building networks, building a community is how you get paid from music. You just got to figure out, is that, you know, releasing your own music? Is that releasing music for licensing, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, I really, I'm glad we were able to have this chat, you know, about this, because I think, you know, this is going to really kind of open people's eyes. Like, you know, there's no reason if you're making music, you know, that you can't, you know, especially if you're making a lot of instrumental music. And let's be honest, a lot of our community is people, you know, doing mostly electronic based music, you know, mostly software synth based music. Whether it sounds like, you know, live musicians playing in a room, or it sounds, you know, like EDM, or, you know, hip hop or whatever, doesn't matter. They're playing by themselves with a MIDI keyboard hooked up to their laptop. You know, this doesn't have to be DAW specific. Yes, we're Logic users, but there's no reason someone with KK and Reaper can't get in on this party. There's no reason someone in Pro Tools can't get in on this party. You know, so I'm really glad we're able to have this conversation today and kind of put this out there and get people aware of what's available, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, any kind of closing thoughts or anything you want to share with people? Any tips?
I
you know,
definitely appreciate the opportunity to share. I mean, there's so much to share. I think we've covered a lot already, so I don't want to, you know, keep getting into stuff. But, you know, you can definitely, anybody wants to reach out to me, I can, you know, shoot me an email, jfrankomusic@gmail.com. That's JFRANKO music@gmail. You know, look me up, social media. I don't do a lot of social media, but
yeah, that's a time suck, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, just, you know, my career isn't built on me being a celebrity, so I don't like market my
you're very behind the scenes.
Yeah, I'm just chilling. I'm usually I'm working, so I'll disappear, and people are like, "Where have you been?" I'm like, "Dude, I've been working." I mean,
I've been there, man. I've been there.
Yeah. So that's, you know, but, you know, reach out. I you know, if I get up with people, I give out a free consultation just to see where they're at. You know, give them some feedback. But I can't give out everything for free though. So I do have students. I give lessons. I mentor people and train people and help them get their production chops up. Help them, you know, I personalize stuff in a way that help them learn what they need to get to where they're trying to go. So, you know,
and likewise here. So I completely get that approach. You know, you know, I'm always giving out free info. But, you know, if you want to be able to like have it tailored and customized and put everything together, you know, reach out to either of us. You know, if you're already familiar with Logic and you want to step up your production game, you know, reach out to Jacques, man. Get set up with him, get that free consultation, and get signed up for some lessons and take your game to the next level. If you're new to Logic, you want to get started with Logic, get in touch with me. Drop a comment below this video, or send an email to oriomonster@logic.band, and let's talk. Let's get your skills up to scuff, because there's no reason we can't participate in this music industry.
Absolutely.
Especially today, man. Like, the world today, everybody's working from home, and there's no reason they have to know we're blind. There's no reason we can't be a part of this income generating means as well.
To that point, that's one thing I love, is that most of my publishers I work with, they have no idea.
Yeah.
I've only had one scenario with one publisher that had the library is called Scorekeepers. I do a lot of work for them out in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
Great music library. Very tough to get in, but great. You could look them up. Anyways, they used to have a thing called what they called the Data Ninja. It was like a way to submit metadata, and it just was completely inaccessible. It was just, every time I did a track, it was like I had to try and get somebody to help me, and it was so confusing.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wrote them. I said, listen, this, I'm blind. Straight up. I cannot do this. It is not accessible. And they were like, wow, we had no idea. We want to be sensitive to your situation. We like the music you're sending us.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just give us a text file, just a Word document with,
mm-hmm.
Just the metadata? They said, we'll do it. And that's literally the only time I've ever had a conversation about me being blind. Out of all the hundreds. Yeah. And people are willing to accommodate if they have to.
Yeah.
But
be kind and be suggestive. Like, go to them, explain the situation, but have a solution ready to suggest as well. Like, don't be like, oh, this is a problem, fix it. Like, have a solution, be willing to work with them.
Which is what I did. I said, listen, I'm sorry. I simply can't. Is there anything I can do? Can I give you a spreadsheet? Can I give you a, they were like, absolutely. This will work. And it's cool, because out of all the, music I've signed, that's the only time that I've ever run into, even having to talk about me being blind.
Right.
So, it's kind of nice to be, typically
playing in a level playing field with everyone else.
Definitely. And usually, getting a job or going to a job interview, if they don't know up front, you can't see, you walk in with your cane, they're like, shoot,
it's kind of off-putting, and it's almost demoralizing in a way to constantly have to be like, look, I can do this too. I can, I need some accommodations, but I can operate on the same level. And the internet gives us a level playing field out the door. If your music is on par with everybody else, if your production skills is on par with everyone else, you are being judged just like everyone else,
Absolutely.
And your blindness, your gender, nothing comes into play other than the product that you're putting out,
Absolutely.
And that's where, it becomes paramount to get your stuff up to snuff, put in the time, put in the work, put in the effort, put in the energy, and get your stuff sounding on par with everything else on the radio. You better be able to listen to one of your tracks in your iTunes library and your Spotify library and have something else come up on either side of it, before it and after it, and you don't realize that's your track because it didn't stick out like a sore thumb. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, no, definitely.
So, get your stuff to that point, because once your stuff is on that level, there is no reason we can't participate in this business like anyone else whose stuff is on that level. Because the people that aren't making it, it's not because of any other factor than their music isn't up to snuff either.
Absolutely.
So I definitely, I'm glad we're able to have this conversation. So thank you again. Shout out your info if people want to get in touch with you one last time.
Yeah, if you want to just send me a personal email, it's jfrankomusic@gmail.com. So JFRANKO music@gmail.com. Look me up on SoundCloud. Feel free and check out some music, subscribe, follow. I don't promote my SoundCloud much, but you can get a feel for, some of the music I do. It's simply just on SoundCloud as Jacques Franko. That's JACQUES, and then Franko FRANKO. I'll get on Facebook sometimes. You can look me up on there if you want. Or I don't do tons of social media, but reach out. However you find me, feel free and reach out. I love to connect with people however I can.
All right, man. Thank you so much once again. Thank you for your time. I know you're cutting into some of your family time, so I really, really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us and just kind of talk about this and shed some light on this part of the industry with us today, man. Thank you so much again.
Yeah, you're very welcome, man. And again, thank you very much for having me. I definitely enjoyed it.